What is your thoughts on the 49ers defense?
Yeah, so I don't buy into this perception that they're not as good as they need to be. I think that the offense is playing at such an uncharacteristically high level. I mean, they're playing nearly flawless football through 4 weeks that any small blemish on the defense's record feels like the only blemish for the 49ers in the football game. So therefore, we seem to focus in on it a little bit more. I think part of it is also maybe people having different expectations based on preseason what Arizona was without understanding like, hey, if we're 4 weeks into the season and Arizona has a real run game and a real run game that's going to give anybody problems throughout the season with James Conner, and their scheme is very good. So I think that plays into it a little bit. But if you wanted to ask me what I feel the number one issue with the Niners defense is, because I don't know that there's necessarily an issue. I think they're still very good, but I do think there's a level that they can get to that's even beyond this one. It's two things. One, I feel like they're just still getting comfortable. I think Steve Wilks. I don't know why I call him Wilks. Steve Wilks is getting acclimated to his personnel, and I think his personnel is getting acclimated to him. People forget that D'Amico went through some growing pains too early in his tenure when he first became the DC at the start of 2021, and now he had to deal with Josh Norman playing corner. But D'Amico was there through the entire Saleh installation of this defense, and it was a kind of a continuation with where he took this scheme. And even then, he had to find his feet. Similarly, I think with Wilks in this defense, there is some bit of just getting comfortable with each other, what Wilks likes to call in certain deep situations versus what suits this personnel in certain situations. But I will get to the one thing that I do think is the crux of the issue right now, and that is I just don't think there's enough disguise to their defense. Right now, the Niners don't disguise their defense 78.8% of the time. The league average defense doesn't disguise 73% of the time. So they're a little higher than the league average. They play middle of the field closed, which means single high with a single post safety 56% of the time. They play middle of the field open, which is too high 43% of the time. They line up in middle field closed, which is single high 39.4% of the time. And that same 39.4% or 39% of the let me start over. They line up middle of the field closed and play middle of the field closed 39.4% of the time. They
Okay.
line up middle of the field open and play middle of the field open 39.4% of the time. Only 22.2% of the time is there a disguise in terms of lining up in middle of the field closed. 3.6% of the time they switch from closed to open, so they drop a safety out. Usually teams rotate down anyway, so that's not a number that's shocking when you're talking about disguises. But 16.6% of the time, which is the other number, which is the other half of the 20.2% of the time, they line up in middle of the field open and they rotate down from too high. I think when we look at Steve Wilks' MO, we look at his history, we do think of a guy who gets creative. We do think of a guy who has some exotic blitzes. And I think one of D'Amico's biggest successes was all the sim pressures he had in his bag on third down. He didn't have that many different ones. They would always line up, and they were all about getting this defensive line one-on-ones. And Wilkes still does that in some capacity with 5 defensive linemen or just with the doubles that Bosa gets and how they shift the line based on how the protection is to get Javon Hargrave a one-on-one, which he wins all the time, or Eric Armstead and one-on-one because he wins all the time. And so we can maybe go back through those numbers and explain them a little more slowly. But the
Yeah.
crux of it is
Yeah.
that I do think that they need to disguise a little bit more, and I do expect them to do that. I think they've gotten into just lining them up, playing a lot of man coverage in third down, and it's yielded success because they haven't played receiving cores that have really tested the strength. But for example, this week against Dallas, I think if you line up and play man on third down with a 5-man rush, or you just line up and play man, CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott will eat that alive a little bit. You got to play zone.
I'm gonna circle back around, help Jimbo out here, maybe some of the others in the chat, and
Mm-hmm.
then also ask you a follow-up question. But before I do that, I want to get to Larry. Don't want to ISO him out of this show. Larry, what are your thoughts overall on the defense of the 49ers?
Well, we know it's a good defense, right? It was the number 1 defense a year ago. It added Javon Hargrave, so we know it's a good defense. But Steelers offensively are lame. The Giants offensively didn't have Barkley. Arizona, signed their quarterback, 3 weeks before the season started. The Rams were the only good offensive team that they've played, and they gave up 23 points to the Rams. And then also, to me, the other aspect of this thing is that Wilkes, if you look at the numbers, has rushed a lot with 4, but those timely blitzes and the offense's dominance, and the offense has scored 30 a game, more than 30 a game, but 30 in every game, has made has made it an easier game to defend in the second half for the defense. And then my big concern was the corner depth and the defensive end depth. And, we don't know about Luter. We don't know about Womack. Jameson's a Carolina Panther. Their corner depth has already been tested. They already picked up Kendall Sheffield. And then, to me, the big stat is the one that says that Drake Jackson, Cleveland Farrell, and Kerry Hyder have 8 combined quarterback hits in 4 games. In 243 pass rush snaps, that trio has 8 combined quarterback hits. And so I really think that's a problem. That's a major problem. And I think that they need additional upgrades on that defensive end spot. They're good inside, but their backups at defensive end are nowhere close to as good as Ebukam and Amenahue and Jordan Willis from a year ago. And it just hasn't been exposed yet because they score 30 to 35 a game, and they've got Bosa and Jackson and really good tackles, and it hasn't really shown itself. But the backup defensive ends are nowhere close to as good as they were last year, and they might want to consider picking up a Randy Gregory or somebody like that. They may want to start looking around because I think this problem isn't going away. Kerry Hyder is a veteran locker room presence, but he doesn't bend the edge. And Cleveland Farrell was nice in the preseason, but he's got 10 sacks in 4 seasons, and he's been shut out the last 2 weeks. And even Drake Jackson got 3 sacks in week 1, but if you look at his pressures, 9 of the 11 came in the first 2 games. He's only had 2 pressures the last 2 weeks. So I think that defensive end group outside of Bosa is questionable.
Most certainly. I want to give Ultimate Chili Nachos with queso and guacamole a shout out here, but I've got to correct you. If you're going to call him Jerome, then you have to say Hargrove, not Hargrave. So it's Jerome Hargrove is what Shannon Sharp called him. So
right.
I'm just going to give you a little correction. You got his last name wrong, but good effort. Good effort.
Yeah, well done.
All right, Vish, I wanted to circle back to this. So you talked about, you threw a lot out there.
Yeah, let me
middle
explain.
field closed, middle field open.
Let me explain okay, go ahead.
Let me get it back real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
Just in a roundabout way, Jimbo, what he's saying is if the 49ers show you a defense pre-snap, that is likely going to be the defense that you get post-snap, which is pretty rare in the NFL. In the NFL, most teams post-snap are going to try to confuse you. They're going to move their safeties around afterwards to give you a different coverage look than what you thought it was, all those things. My question to you, though, Vish, really comes down to, okay, they show you middle field open or middle field close, but on those plays, how much are they switching the coverages? So you can have middle field open, but it could be a cover 2, a cover 4, a cover 6. It could be man. How often are they switching up just the overall coverages, or do you know that? Like how many? What's the percentage of cover 3 versus?
I don't know the full numbers on that, but okay. I think we've all seen the Niners defense to know that they primarily play 3D.
Yeah,
they play quarters. That's what they like to play on early downs, and then they might play a couple snaps to cover 6, depending on who they're playing and who the starting cornerback is. They'll occasionally get into cover 2, but they don't really play a lot of cover 2. And then on third downs, they've been playing single high and they've been playing a lot of tight man. But the reason to me the disguise doesn't matter is because when we're talking about a defense like this, that's this fast and covers like this, one of the things I think Saleh unlocked in 2020 and D'Amico continued is when you rotate your safeties and change structure just a little bit for quarterbacks, you just make them hesitate for a split second. And to me, a hesitation for a split second against this defensive line and this defense in particular means that the quarterback gets sacked. And when we talk about, well, why are the 49ers pressure numbers so high? Why are the 49ers sack numbers so low? I'm not saying that this is the exact reason. There's a lot more that plays into it than simply just changing the coverage picture on the quarterback. But to me, it's part of this conversation, because when we do get into and look at what D'Amico did, really at the end of the years in playoffs, when they would kind of sit in a too high and they would rotate down and play three deep, or they would play three buzz, or they would play, quarters, or they would play cover six, they would do stuff like that. What it did for even quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers, who's seen every defense and knows, he just wouldn't know between, these six zone defenses, which one the Niners were going to be in, just because of safety rotation and pre-snap everything. They would kind of line up in the quarters umbrella a little bit, especially down the end of the season. And that's where I think it helped in terms of getting sacks. And I think Larry's right. Part of it is that the defensive line isn't as good. But I also would say, when you look at the number of snaps that Jerome Hargrove and Eric Armstead end up logging over the course of a game, especially next to Bosa, they should have more sacks even without the backups being not as good, because those three players are frankly dominant, and they're frankly having all three very, very strong seasons. And that's where I do think it's not that I think Wilkes is doing a poor job, but I think that as they continue to get a feel for each other, changing coverage picture a little bit might help aid in this problem that we're continuing to discuss with the 49ers defense, which is really just two things. One is sacks, and then the other one is, oh, hey, they let up a 99-yard drive. And so people are really, really pissy about that.